How would you respond to a student who feels that being hopeful about climate change is unrealistic?
Having a belief that something is possible, even if it is unrealistic and unlikely to actually achieve.
Many students feel that they can't make a difference unless they go viral. Do you believe that's true?
The sort of like social media obsession that our society broadly has right now and how that affects the ways we think about organizing. Most of the stuff that I produce, most of the stuff that any individual will produce isn't going to be that. Like it's not going to be perfect or great or whatever. And it's just about producing something that you can be okay with.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Essay Pro podcast. My name is Kennedy Porter, and today's podcast title is From Science to Storytelling, Building a Career That Shapes Climate Futures. Today, we are met with Syris Valentine. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience so they get a little bit more information about what it is you do?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, as you said, I'm Cyrus. I am a independent climate journalist. I've written for um, magazines and outlets like The Atlantic, High Country News, Atmos. I have a couple stories in like The Atlantic and others. But I focus, yeah, specifically on climate solutions because I have a little bit of a background in community organizing and policy activism. So I try to use that to like shape and inform the kinds of stories that I tell, that hopefully can also then go on to inform the kinds of strategies and solutions that other activists pursue.
Nice. Saving the world, man. That's good.
Hi.
uh, your path has kind of moved from planetary science to activism and now writing. How do you see that these different chapters kind of connect in their ways?
Yeah, for sure. So as you said, like I started my sort of career path, if you will, studying planetary science, specifically like geophysics and that kind of stuff at the University of Washington. And while I was there, I was doing a little bit of research in space technology and crazy shit like asteroid mining, which is like really fun. But in that work, I was sort of learning a lot about the science of how our planet works. Um, which sort of inspired me to get involved in climate activism and other forms of like racial justice. Like at the time, I started undergrad that is like at the sort of peak of the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black lives, and was really inspired by that kind of work and was realizing, that in my view, with what I was seeing with in terms of climate change, that I feel like in order for there to be a future in which Black lives can truly matter, there has to be climate justice, like, because the climate crisis is only going to exacerbate injustices and oppression. But really, when it came to like these different chapters of my life, they really just informed and shaped and deepened the way I thought about certain issues. Like this planetary science work informed the way that I thought about like the severity of the climate crisis, the importance um, of climate action. And then in that kind of work, when I was doing things like serving on Seattle's Green New Deal Oversight Board and shaping the way we thought about climate policies here in the city of Seattle, where I'm based, and I've lived here for the last 11 years now, I was
Mhm.
just realizing that there was a lot of gaps missing from the way that we thought about climate action and what it means to pursue climate justice. Like there are in reality, we need these kinds of like systemic transformations. And right now, a lot of the ways that we talk about it are very like piecemeal, thinking about how we maybe get folks with more EVs or get more solar panels installed or that kind of thing. Um, and when we're missing this like larger picture, which made me want to then go into writing and journalism to really highlight the necessity of those kinds of systemic solutions and show what people are actively doing today to try to bring those to reality.
That's interesting. It's kind of interesting how they both kind of like merge together in that way, you
For
know?
sure.
So, with the zigzagging kind of in your career, from studying planets to working in tech, community organizing, and journalism, for students who fear getting off track, do you think winding paths is the norm, especially in climate work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the norm or not, is the reality. But what I can say is I feel like having been on this kind of winding path, I think it's the most gratifying just because you get the chance to see so many different facets of society and interact with a bunch of different people from different backgrounds, and use that to inform the kind of work that you do, whether it's in climate change or outside of it.
Hmm.
Um, and all of that is like, I think in climate change in particular, getting exposure to technology or policy or business is really important because all of those things are going to come together and shape the ways that we think about transforming our society, our culture, our economy to really address the climate crisis. And ultimately, the climate movement, broadly speaking, needs people with a wealth of experiences and backgrounds and understandings if we're really going to succeed in the long run.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's like finding people who kind of understand the world, right? A little bit. They have been around.
Absolutely.
They've met with different types of people and experienced new experiences. I understand that entirely.
Yeah, and when it comes to like meeting different people as well, like one of the sort of challenges that the climate movement has had historically, and I mean continues to face, um, is the fact that a lot of folks involved are folks like myself who are like pretty well educated,
Mhm.
are on like in blue cities and kind of like these like quote unquote coastal elite areas, and we're really struggling to reach into like working class communities and those areas that are like the vast majority of the American public in the world, frankly, and getting folks who have those lived experiences and can also speak to those communities is going to be increasingly essential.
Hmm. And along the lines of that, kind of like finding ways to connect with communities. I have my own answer to this question, but I'm interested in your take on it. Do you think that humans are wired to respond to stories more than data? And if so, what does that mean for how we talk about climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, stories are, I don't know, the human animal as an animal is really like predisposed to storytelling. And I mean, in the thousands of years of human history before what we know of today as science really like emerged, so much of like our knowledge and understanding and collected wisdom of generations was passed down through stories. Like I have these like bookshelves behind me and I have on there books written by like Greek philosophers and playwrights and poets and whatnot, just because like it's for one fascinating to see the ways in which they told stories, but also within those stories how they were sort of transmitting their understanding of the world and their specific sort of like framework. And I also
Mhm.
have like on a different bookshelf, I have like collections of African folk tales as well that tell in some ways similar stories but have different sort of casts to them and different hues, and portray a different sort of understanding of the world and wisdoms as well. So yeah, stories are like super important, and data just doesn't itself on its own resonate people with like on an emotional level that really helps them
Yeah.
to conceptualize and understand what we're up against. Because like we can talk about 1.5 degrees of warming or 2 degrees of warming, and that just doesn't mean anything to anyone.
Nothing. Nothing. Yeah.
But it's when you start talking about at 1.5 or at 2 degrees of warming, you start talking about like what's going to happen to coral reefs and paint that a particular picture of like the increasing bleaching and dieback of coral reefs, or like the Amazon being more prone to wildfires, or even here in like Washington and on the West Coast, the increased risk of wildfires and what we've already seen happen to communities like Chico and in Butte County, or even in like Altadena earlier this year.
Mhm.
Um, Telling those stories and how they explicitly connect both to climate change and to fossil fuel emissions, I think is like what really makes what makes people have an emotional understanding of climate change.
Yeah, it helps them kind of like break through their conscious barriers and like
Yeah,
infect their subconscious mind with the
exactly.
reality. That's true. That's really good. Um, so Cyrus, for students who feel like their influence is small, as a student myself back in the day, I felt like anything I said was kind of echoing out into a void.
Mm,
How can they reframe that as impact rather than failure?
absolutely. I think that like what you were talking about, sort of like speaking into the void almost, is sort of like amplified by social media as well.
Yeah.
It just feels so often like where you're literally just shouting into a void and no one's really hearing you.
Hmm.
Um, But when it comes to thinking about like reframing these like small influences, one of the things that I think about a lot is actually a book right here, Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, that I
Mm-hmm.
reread often. And she talks a lot in there about sort of how activists and organizers and just like community members in general can think about um, a way of strategically approaching emergence, and emergence being this idea that like small changes and small actions, when added up over time, can lead to these like dramatic and profound changes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is how like movements have worked historically. Like if you think about the civil rights movement or the Black Power movement, like those weren't we often talk about like the March on Washington as being like this culminating moment in the civil rights movement, but that was at the end of a decade, literally a decade of detailed, deliberate, diligent organizing in
Mm-hmm.
so many communities across the South in particular, but even in the North with like sit-ins and marches and voter registration drives and whatnot. Um, but yeah, when it comes to thinking about folks' individual actions, it's recognizing that even if you're just having a conversation at a cafe with your friend about climate change and the climate crisis, that can inform and shape the way that that person thinks more about climate justice and might want to get more involved and they might talk to someone else.
Yeah.
Um,
Butterfly effect.
yeah, exactly. It's that kind of stuff. Or like also in emergent strategy, one of the things that Adrienne Marie Brown talks about is this idea of sort of fractals. So the idea of this like sort of pattern that replicates at scale. So the ways in which, in particular, the ways we act in our individual communities and families and friend groups, sort of becoming a pattern and a template that can ripple out to larger and larger scales, which is why like I and many others really believe that local, even like hyper local actions, so thinking about your individual neighborhood, action at that kind of level can be so profound and important in the long run because it can create this sort of ripple effect or the butterfly effect as you were talking
Yeah.
about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I totally agree. Kind of in the same vein as what we literally just talked about. Many students think that activism means just marching in the street or organizing events. But do you also see writing, blogging, or even sharing a story on social media as a form of activism too?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is, my answer is honestly yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
Where like
Mm,
I think that writing or sharing social media posts or like reels or TikToks or what have you, um, can be a form of activism for sure. If it's
mm-hmm.
approached in a sort of like strategic way
Yeah.
and thinking about like what the long-term implication of that is. Like I think that, I don't know, if like you're like there are ways in which I've seen so many examples of folks who use social media in really like impressive ways to affect activism and use it in sort of the context of a larger strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Like an old roommate of mine, his name's Alex Harris, Haraus.
Mm,
Him and folks like Elise Joshi, Joshi spelled Joshi, have been involved in campaigns, multiple campaigns where they've specifically focused on social media as their
mm,
like primary outlet for reaching people, where they have like gotten hundreds of thousands of people writing letters and emailing the representatives and whatnot, specifically through social media posts. And that kind of stuff is tremendous. And they've had like a, specific wins, and some of them haven't. Some of their campaigns haven't been successful. Many have. Um, I don't say that kind of stuff is like really important organizing that can happen.
yeah.
But outside of that, if it's just like sort of like the kind of writing that I often do, where it's sort of sharing a deeper perspective on something, some event that's happening in the news or some work that someone's doing elsewhere, um, I feel like that is more about culture shifts than I guess activism in the way we tend to think about it, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
helping inform and shape and change the way people think about what they can do in their own individual communities. So it can like lead to activism. And it's hard to say whether or not it is in and of itself activism. Like one example that I've thought of a lot when I've grappled with the question of like journalism versus activism is Ida B. Wells, who was like prolific and pioneered, frankly, investigative journalism, and in particular helped uncover the stories of Black men and Black women who were being lynched in the South, and used journalism to help show just how prolific the problem was and just like the horrors and terrors that Black communities were dealing with.
Hmm.
Um, and that helped to then guide and inform the kind of activism that folks did in Jim Crow South. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that that can be called activism because it really did help provide this kind of like, I don't know, um, inspiration to folks and show that this wasn't like, these folks weren't quote unquote criminals or doing anything. They were just people living their lives that were being
Hmm.
targeted specifically because they were Black. Um,
Exactly.
and that was like profound and powerful. But one of the other things that like I don't know whether or not it is in and of itself activism, writing and the arts in general are essential for movement building. Like
Hmm.
the Black Panther Party had a quote unquote ministry of culture where they had writers and painters and artists specifically as like a key body within the party
Of
to
course.
help folks understand and think about what the future of the Black community in Oakland or elsewhere that the Black Panther Party had chapters, whether it's Chicago or Seattle even, what the future of that community could look like if the like 10-point program of the Black Panther Party were implemented.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like going back to kind of like social media, because like you can there's I feel like there's it can definitely be used for social justice and activism, but there's also like a performative element on some side
Yeah,
of it, whether I feel like the difference kind of holds weight if you kind of express opinions and kind of add writing to it. Because you see a lot of
yeah,
people who kind of just repost stories over and over again. They kind of I feel like
exactly.
to them it feels like they're doing something massive, but
Mm,
and then you see other people who post stories and then kind of write along with it and kind of
yeah,
express their own views about it. And I feel like that's where it's better. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Really
Yeah, that
interesting.
sort of like deeper level to it where you're providing some sort of you're adding to it as opposed to just like reproducing it, reposting like you were talking
Yeah.
about, I think is where it starts to become something more like activism.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like I think what I was trying to get at when I was thinking about like the Black Panther Party and others is like I feel like it has to, and even with the work of like Alex Harris and Elise Joshi and others like them, I feel like for it to sort of in my mind, and other people can disagree, in my mind, for it to sort of qualify as activism, it has to connect to something that exists outside of social media or outside of your blog. Because even so much of the writing that I do on my newsletter, Just Progress, is like it exists for me to sort of process what I'm thinking about. And it is informed inherently by my activism, by my reading, and my like political view. But I don't consider 95% of that I wouldn't call activism.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Well, kind of circling back to storytelling. If a student wanted to start today, what's one simple storytelling exercise you'd recommend? Something that kind of helps them connect their personal experiences with the bigger climate picture.
Yeah. Um, one of the things that I've personally done in the past and that I've actually even seen folks do at like conferences that I've gone to, like an activism environment conferences, um, has to do with like specifically thinking about place. And in particular, like one of the things that I've done and that I would encourage other folks to do is like really think about a place that you like really love and hold dear to you. And that can be like a cafe down the block from your apartment. It can be a park or I don't know, a bench even that you like go and sit on often and just like watch people pass by and like what that sort of block looks like. But think about that and sort of hold it in your mind and write about both that place and what makes it special to you and when and what it would mean to you if it were affected and taken away from you by the climate crisis. So like
Mhm.
I've thought about this a lot with a place in my hometown, a park. It's called Liberty Lake Regional Park, and it's this like I think it's a couple dozen acres, maybe 100 acres of like forests and hiking trails that I've like walked so many times. I don't even know how many times I've hiked this specific trail outside my hometown. But every time I go back to it, in particular in recent years, I've seen how like the droughts that have been affecting Washington and all of the West Coast and Western US, how that's affected the forest there and how many more trees have fallen down and this like buildup of dry fuels effectively. And I think about often like what it would happen, what would mean to the for me for that park to be affected by a wildfire. And I've written about that a couple times, and it's just like re um, reinforces for me the importance of climate activism. Um, and so that's like one exercise is thinking about, yeah, the specific place and writing about that specific place that is dear to you and what it would mean for it to be sort of torn away from you in the aftermath of a climate disaster. But on the flip side, you could think about writing sort of the reverse and how that place might transform if we were to take sort of like really deep, radical climate action and pursue these kinds of like ideas that people talk about, whether it's the just transition or the or regenerative economy, um, and what that those kinds of transformations might look like at that particular level. So that could be like, I don't know, if you're thinking about like a cafe or a specific block in your neighborhood, it could be thinking about like there's vines climbing up the wall of a building across the street, or there's solar panels on the rooftops, and there's more
Mhm.
trees on the block, and there's more shade as a result of that, which reduces how hot it can get.
Mhm.
Or there's like more garden patches in your neighborhood or whatever. So I think
Yeah.
doing both of those is important, both from like getting a real understanding of what the impacts of climate change can be, but also like what the world could look like if we took action to address it.
Yeah, it's like personalizing things for you. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
it puts a lot more care from yourself into it. I totally get that.
For
That's
sure.
good. So Cyrus, the phrase just transition, that can sound abstract. How would you explain it to students in a way that makes it feel real and relevant to their own lives?
Yeah. I talk about the just transition a lot. I absolutely love it. But I will say just that before I get into the specifics of like what this can mean and make it less abstract, there tend to be two ways of talking about the just transition and the way this sort of term is used in mainstream discourse. Like, I think in 2020, Joe Biden used the term just transition often in his presidential campaign. And it's used often by Democrats in Congress as well. And typically, what they are talking about is thinking about how, like, fossil fuel workers and those kinds of folks can, in the context of a transition towards a green economy where we're no longer reliant on fossil fuels, where plastic production is either diminished or eliminated in its entirety, how those kinds of workers can find a new home in the green economy. When I think about the just transition, it's very different from that specific thing. Like that's important inherently, making sure that folks have means of like providing livelihoods for themselves, their families, and their communities. Um, but more broadly, like a broader just transition is, and the way I think about it, I think about a framework that's put together by the Climate Justice Alliance and the Movement Generation. Movement Generation is a nonprofit and community organization based in the Bay Area and Oakland in particular. And the Climate Justice Alliance is like a coalition of so many different organizations, including Movement Generation. And what they sort of talk about is this idea of moving from our current extractive economy to a like living or regenerative economy. And so right now, there's so many different pillars of like this specific economy that we're living in right now. But one example is like we have a sort of linear chain in the goods that we consume. So they talk about it as like take, make, waste, where you sort of take material from the earth, whether that's like copper or iron or petroleum, and then you make something from that stuff. And at the end of the line, we're wasting it. We're throwing it away in our garbage bins, our dumpsters, and then putting it in a landfill and getting rid of it. And when we think about a living economy, this becomes a sort of like circular process where instead of taking, making, and wasting, maybe we're extracting a little bit, but ultimately and making something from it. But ultimately, like ideally, the vast majority of what we are creating things from are through either recycling or reusing products or upcycling things. Because we've already have so much stuff. I can't remember the specific statistic right now, but like in most landfills, because there are phones and other electronics that have sort of been tossed in there, there's a huge amount of copper and other metals and rare earth um, minerals that are essential for like car batteries or even making new laptops and phones. And those kinds of things could easily be salvaged. Or another example is that I love is deconstruction. So this idea that instead of like literally throwing a wrecking ball through a home or a building when you're getting rid of it, instead workers are going in and literally taking it apart brick by brick and board by board so that those things can be reused down the line in other projects, whether you're like building a bench from it or building a
Mhm.
new home from it, or there's even examples where folks have taken boards that are pulled out of old homes because they're like really high quality wood and they've made violins from them. Like it's
Hey,
really cool.
that's cool.
Uh, and that kind of stuff is like these examples are things that people are actively doing to sort of move us towards, in particular, like circular economy. But then there's other things like worker-owned cooperatives. So going from a world in which your boss or the CEO or the owner of the company is extracting a bunch of profit from your labor, which is how
Mhm.
things are done right now in the vast majority of places, to something where it is ultimately like the individual workers who are profiting from the accumulated output of their labor. And they're also the ones who get to make decisions on where investments are put in the particular company and what things are prioritized in the long run for the strategic vision of that company or enterprise, whatever it may be in. And it all tends to lead towards things like more direct community investment because when you have a cooperative enterprise, it tends to just be really local. It almost always is a locally owned business. It's pretty hard to do an international worker cooperative. Like you're not going to have something the scale of Amazon that is like worker owned because that's just like sort of contrary to how worker cooperatives tend to function, the sort of scales that they can reach. Um, and if you have a business that is like hugely based in its community and its city, the tendency is that the profits from those kinds of enterprises, those cooperatives, will go back into the community in some way, shape, or form. And often it leads to folks creating other cooperatives, which is really cool. Like there's an example in the Basque country in northern Spain called the Mondragon Corporation, where they started out doing like heating lamps in like the 1950s or something like that. And now they have like a bunch of different worker-owned cooperatives in so many different sectors of the economy. And that particular part of Spain also has the like lowest unemployment in the entire country as a result of these like cooperatives that are there because they're putting so much emphasis on building up their communities and making sure that folks have what they need, and that tends to lead towards creating new businesses.
Wow, dude, that's amazing. Wow,
Yeah.
you're teaching me so much right now. I'm just my mind is blown. That's great, man. So can you share a story where you've written or one you've come across that captures what just transition looks like in action?
Yeah. So it's a story that I haven't written yet, but I've been wanting to write it. I just haven't figured out the like best angle or outlet for it because it's just like
Mhm.
it's fairly niche. There's a bunch of different magazines that are like closing and shuttering right now. Like journalism industry is in a weird flux. But I mentioned Movement Generation and the Climate Justice Alliance. One of the sort of like members of the Climate Justice Alliance and a sort of like project the Movement Generation helped to spur and create is called the Seed Commons,
Mhm.
which is a like collective of cooperatives in a way, where it's just like an internet or not international, it's a national network of um, cooperative financiers in a sense. So like it's these different things. So like here in the Seattle area, we have the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, which helps workers and employees and entrepreneurs here in the Seattle area that want to create cooperatives. It helps them figure out what they need to do to make that happen, whatever industry that might exist in if they're seeking to do that. And the Northwest Cooperative Development Center is one of the members of the Seed Commons. So it's like groups like that that are helping start cooperatives in their communities. And one of the groups that have grown out of the Seed Commons is this like rad group in Asheville, North Carolina called Poder Emma. So it's Poder and then Emma, like the name.
Mhm.
And they're from this like low income, primarily Latino community outside of like on the outskirts of Asheville. And in particular, I can't remember the specific year that they started, but it was within the last like 5 years or so. Um, this community in particular is primarily like mobile homes, and it's like in a mobile home park, and the developer that sort of owns the real estate company that owned the land that this mobile home park sits on, wanted to sell the land or get rid of the community that was there so they could develop it because at least up until Hurricane Helene hit Asheville last year, Asheville had been like growing hugely in terms of its popularity. People were moving there a lot. They're facing like affordability challenges and they're trying to build new apartments and whatnot. And so the real estate company saw it as an opportunity to make a lot of profit by selling these homes and getting this community off their land. And what folks through Poder Emma did and organized through that was to get folks together in the mobile home park to literally buy the land that the mobile home park was on so they could save their community.
Mhm.
And that was their like first step basically was creating their like own cooperative, community controlled like real estate land trust.
Wow.
And in the like 5 or so years since then, they have created a whole bunch of different businesses that are all cooperatives based off of that have sort of emerged out of that. So they have a like child care service, they have an accountant and a bookkeeper, and there's like a couple other businesses that I'm forgetting what are in there right now, but it's like a really prime example of what folks are doing. And what's really like cool and impressive and sort of and adds to the importance of these things when we think about climate change, even though like none of the specific businesses that they have yet pursued are specifically about climate change in the way like they don't have like an energy cooperative, for instance, yet, but many energy cooperatives do exist and are a great example of this kind of thing. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, when there was this like huge amount of flooding and devastation and death, frankly, and just a tremendous tragedy for the Asheville community because of the connections, the networks, the resources that Poder Emma had available. They were able to do a lot to support folks in recovering in the aftermath of Asheville, making sure that they could find food, that they could find like heating oils and gas
Mhm.
for generators or finding places where they could stay while their home was being renovated or rebuilt after the flooding if it needed that. Um,
Mhm.
so it's done a tremendous amount for like that specific community in Asheville, but it's also like a great thing example that folks could easily replicate elsewhere, even if it's
Wow.
the specific case, like it's not about real estate, it's about something else.
It's good. It's good to see communities coming together for each other. That's really nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of pivoting a bit, talking about more students and how they can get involved. What's one way for students who want to get involved to start thinking about systemic change, even if they're just acting locally?
Yeah. Um, I think specifically when it comes to thinking about systemic change, which is like definitely the first sort of step to acting.
Hmm.
The like biggest thing that I would recommend is starting a book club, frankly. I know like reading isn't cool anymore. Like I've seen
I love
statistics about
reading.
like how like there's this huge decline in reading. It's crazy. But I obviously like love books. I'm a big fan.
Mm,
So if folks like want book recommendations, like email me, DM me on Instagram or Blue Sky or wherever you find me, and I can
mhm.
give dozens.
Okay.
But I think that like book clubs in particular are like a great place to start. I've led and participated in so many different book clubs, and it's like really cool to see the ways in which you might read the same book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, frankly, and the different things that people can sort of take out of that. And I think that it's sort of like, I don't know, it's a critical step just to like both like deepen your own understanding and awareness of the possibilities that exist, but also like by working with your friends or neighbors and talking about these things, you're able to start sort of envisioning what kind of things you might be able to actually implement in your community. Um, and even if it doesn't come to that, like you don't start, I don't know, some like community organization or nonprofit at the end of the book club, you're also like one of the benefits that comes out of this is that you're building connections and you're building community and deepening your relationship with the people that you're exchanging ideas with and just chatting with on a monthly or a bi-weekly or weekly basis, however often you choose to meet. Um, and really having those connections is so essential, both to like I don't know, just like the human spirit, frankly. Like we're living in a really disembodied time as a result of like our increased dependence on technology, and just like the ways in which like our cities in the US are designed, they sort of like keep us separated, even when we're all like stacked on top of each other in a really weird way. So like finding ways to like come together and build relationships is like hugely critical and important. Just on that sort of basic level, but also like when we think about resilience to climate disasters, having those kinds of relationships, it's been shown in so many different ways that it like communities that are more connected are more resilient in the face of disaster. Like they're more likely to reduce like casualties and deaths, because like down the block or down the hall, there's like an elderly woman who uses a walker, and now we know for sure that we need to go help her. Or
Mhm.
there's someone who's like a diabetic, and we need to make sure we find insulin for that person, or what have you, whatever like the maladies or diseases or whatever that your community is facing. If you're connected with them, you know that you like need to make sure you're prioritizing supporting that person. Um, and there's enormous examples of like the ways in which connectedness helps to bolster resilience.
Mhm. So bottom line is having community. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
Community is
absolutely.
important. That's really good. Um, kind of in a pivoting a bit, let's talk about burnout. I feel like every artist, every creative, every writer, they've experienced this.
Yeah.
What helps you recognize it in yourself when it's coming on, and what strategies tend to help you recover?
Yeah. This is like a hard question for me because one
Mhm.
of the like challenges I have realized in my own life, like I deal with um mental illness in a very real way. And so like I am like I'm in therapy right now and I have a psychiatrist, and one of the things that I'm like I actively am trying to sort of figure out in my own life is when am I experiencing burnout and when am I experiencing like an episode of clinical depression? And I
Okay.
just genuinely don't know because like the
Mhm.
symptoms are genuinely so similar, and
Mhm.
like ultimately like burnout is like really it's pretty much like a cousin to depression, where
Yeah.
it's like there's pronounced lethargy, there's a feeling of like almost like burnout, well, not burnout, but like sadness and I don't know, hopelessness almost, where it's like
Yeah.
you put
I
all
know.
this
I know the feeling, man. Yeah.
yeah, it's real. You put all this energy into your writing or into your activism, your organizing, your art, whatever that may be, and you're like questioning, I don't know, I'm spending X amount of hours on this every week. Like, what's the point? And there's so much of that with depression too, so it's like hard for me to say like when am I dealing with burnout? What helps me recognize that versus like what helps me recognize I'm just in a depressive episode. And it tends to be that kind of thing where I'm like feeling lethargic. I'm feeling like I don't have very much energy to like address this kind of stuff, or like continue to like pursue my writing or my organizing because I'm not sure if it's going to pan out the way I want it to in the end, whether that's like in the case of writing, sort of like getting a book published or getting a book deal or whatever, or I don't know, helping shape the way people think about the world and inform their activism. And then on the sort of the actual activism and organizing side, it's like a question of like, are we ever actually going to achieve this just transition? Is this specific policy that we're organizing around actually going to get passed, or will it have the impact that we're hoping for? Um, and when we're in that, I'm in that kind of moment of real grappling with doubt in a very real way. That's when I'm sort of like recognizing that I'm either entering a depressive episode or entering burnout. And when it comes to thinking about recovering from either of those, frankly, I think what I have done recently is what I would recommend to everyone to do before you enter that, like that kind of period. Because like so much of it is like preventing it from happening, not so much recovering, because once you're in it, recovery is like really hard and really challenging. But I feel like I cannot overstress enough the importance of like therapy and mental health services, whether that's like going fully into like the psychiatric route, which I've recently done, or just like having a therapist that you meet with once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks, whatever, and just that person that you can sort of check in with, and talk through the things that you're dealing with. And hopefully, if you have a good therapist, that can also give you specific personal strategies to help deal with that, whatever it may be. Um, because yeah, that's like so critical. And there's other aspects too of like thinking about personal practices of self-care, like going for a walk in a park in a green space is like critical. There's like so many studies showing that like exposure to green space is important for physical and mental health.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I cannot stress enough specifically getting a therapist.
Therapist, sunlight, and greenery. There it
Yeah,
is right there, everyone.
exactly.
That's really good. Sometimes I like to go take my shoes and socks off and walk around the grass. It's really
Yeah.
good.
Oh, that's really good. There is, on that note, actually, there is a trail here in Seattle that like goes along Lake Washington, which is like the lake that sort of just sits on the east side of the city, opposite the Puget Sound. And
Mhm.
it's like waterfront trail in the spring in particular when we're getting a lot of like runoff from the mountains from like snow melt and whatnot, and there's also rain happening, parts of the trail will literally flood and it's like muddy and kind of gross, but I
Ha.
genuinely love to take my shoes and socks off and just like walk through the mud and get it like squishing between my toes. It feels amazing. Like it's kind of gross at first,
Yeah.
but once you like lean into it, it's a great feeling, frankly.
Okay, well, I know what I'm doing this weekend. Okay. Well, kind of in a similar vein of like recovering and, finding that hope. Some people see hope as naive.
Mm.
How would you respond to a student who feels that being hopeful about climate change is unrealistic?
Um, yeah, that's the like, I don't know, the trick of a lot of this is frankly it is unrealistic. Like,
Mhm.
and that's not a reason to give up hope. Like one of the other books that I sort of like I prepped this, framed myself, is this book
Nice.
Hope in the Dark by Rebecca
Hey,
Solnit. Um, it's a book that I've read a couple different times, and Rebecca Solnit is both an author and an activist. And she actually, I mean, she wrote that a couple de decades ago. Like I think it was in the 1990s or like early 2000s. But she talks about her own sort of like practice of hope. And one of the things that she talks about, and a lot of other people have talked about, is that hope really is like an article of faith more than it is like a I don't know, something that you conjure from data and create from like, oh, we've achieved X, Y, or Z steps, and like we'll be able to get where we're going in 5 or 10 years, and that's guaranteed. It's so much more about like having a belief that something is possible, even if it is unrealistic and unlikely to actually achieve. It's about like believing that no, even if we fall short of our target, the like act of pursuing this goal and building this movement is inherently worth it. And if we do achieve that, it will be like tremendous and have a potential to really transform people's lives. Um, and so like there all to say there's like a difference between optimism and hope. Like I am a very hopeful person. I am not optimistic. Like I am deeply pessimistic, frankly, about like the likelihood and the chances of things succeeding, but I nonetheless believe that it is worth it. And that belief to me is what hope is about. That like this is inherently worth it even if we don't succeed, because if we don't try, then we won't. Then like we're doomed to fail and we're doomed to things getting even worse than they are right now and could get if we fall short of our like grandest ideals and aspirations. Um, Especially because there's such a big gap between where we are now and where we want to be. And when I say we, I mean people like me who are like really adamant about the just transition and this like economic transformation.
Mhm.
There's such a tremendous gap that like even if we get halfway there, it'll be tremendous on its own. But if we
Mhm.
get all the way there, oh my God, that would be a dream.
Yeah. It's like that journey. The journey is fun. The journey's fun.
Exactly.
Even if we don't hit the target, we did it. We said we tried. And I've heard this thing, it was like um thinking that you can kind of increases the chances that you'll do it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? That's good.
absolutely.
That's really good stuff.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And it's just like, I don't know, it's so essential to like have some amount of hope to like keep going, frankly, because like the reality of like organizing and activism is that there will be far, far, far more failures than there will ever be successes.
Hmm.
And if you don't have hope of some success down the line, it is incredibly difficult to keep going in the face of all that failure.
Exactly. So, Cyrus, we kind of already talked about, you know, the importance of having a community and firm group around you. What role does community play in upholding resilience and building it?
Mm,
Can hope exist alone, or must it be shared with others to stay strong?
yeah. So, I mean, I talked about the resilience a little bit ago, specifically in the context of like natural disasters and
Mhm.
like it's super critical there for sure. But even if we're just talking about emotional or like spiritual resilience, which it seems like sort of what you're getting at here.
Mhm.
I think it's like almost like doubly critical from that perspective. Um, like having that kind of community is very essential for it. It's something that like Rebecca Solnit talks about, Angela Davis in her book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, also talks about it in the context of the movement for Black Lives, and the Free Palestine movement that like hope like collectives are sort of like a deep reservoir for hope. It
Mhm.
is this like well that you can continually draw from and pour into at the same time because it's like it's so the energy of being around people and building community with people helps so much to like reinforce the importance of what you're doing and the like belief that you might be able to create some sort of change in the long run. Because if you're just like acting alone and like pounding on the door of City Hall or whatever by yourself, the chances of the mayor or city councilor coming to talk to you are pretty low. But if there's like 10 of you or 100 of you pounding on those doors, they're definitely going to notice. Like if you think about, I think it was 2018 that the Sunrise Movement sat in the office of Nancy Pelosi and was like demanding a Green New Deal, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat in as well and joined in that sort of demand. And really, that was the first moment that in the United States we had a mainstream conversation about what a Green New Deal would mean and could look like. And if it weren't for the Sunrise Movement collectively doing that sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office, I don't think it would have ever reached that level, frankly.
Mhm.
Even if we had the kinds of like marches that were happening with like the Fridays for Future movement around that same time, even if those marches were still happening, I think without that kind of sit-in, it wouldn't have been the same conversation. Because like having these like differ in tactics is so essential, especially because that sit-in had very clear demands, which I think are particularly important for this kinds of things. And I think that being in that kind of collective helped folks in the Sunrise Movement who were high schoolers and college students to like really have hope that they might be able to get a Green New Deal established in the United States. And even though that hasn't happened yet, we saw in Biden's term that although there wasn't an explicit Green New Deal, the things like the Investment Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, or also it's called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, those things together had a lot of things, a lot of components that were drawn directly from the demands for a Green New Deal. Um, and that's since been demolished by the current administration, who's just like entirely against climate action, which is like horrifying and horrifying in many other ways. But specifically when it comes to climate change, he's just like taking us not even just like two steps back, but like drawing us into a dark age of climate action is horrifying. But I digress.
Yeah, I totally agree. Um, with everything you said. That's very true. Um, so kind of pivoting a bit, and we're kind of going back to some things we talked about previously about students and how they can make a difference in the world. Many students feel that they can't make a difference unless they go viral. Do you believe that's true?
No, it's a
Good.
short answer. I mean, like I gave the examples earlier of Alex Harris and Elise Joshi who have gone many times viral, and
Mhm.
others like them have and have used that kind of virality to create really impactful change. And so it can be with proper organizing, it certainly can be like a strategy or a tactic, I should say. But it is ultimately like just one tactic. And one of the things I actually like sort of wrote about this for my own newsletter, it was a couple months ago at this point, but it was this sort of like question of the sort of like social media obsession that our society broadly has right now and how that affects the ways we think about organizing. And this isn't just students or young people, frankly, like it is. I see it among politicians even who are like 40 and 50 years old of like their obsession with like going viral on social media or like Zoran Mamdani's campaign. I love Zoran Mamdani. I hope he wins the mayoral election. But like his campaign is like has a really like impressive social media presence, but they also do a lot of like on the ground organizing outside of that. And it's like that kind of work that is like ultimately making the difference and making the case to people on a sort of like block by block basis almost across the city of New York. In addition to their like really clever approach to social media. Um, but like it's all to say like social media is one tactic and one tool in our like collective toolbox as a movement or as organizers. But if we get too obsessed with that, we'll sort of lose sight of what we can or cannot achieve and do the things that will really meaningfully make the difference because it's ultimately taking the work offline that does lead to that change. So it's things like doing that sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office or with the examples I gave of content creators who have used virality to make a difference, those were explicitly connected to campaigns that were happening offline. And in particular, like these letter writing campaigns where they would, in addition to like sending the emails and sending the letters, they would go into people's offices. And at one point, I think Alex Harris in particular like printed off a bunch of these letters and had them in like boxes. And him and a bunch of other folks literally took those boxes of letters and emails into the office of like I think it was the Bureau of Land Management or the Department of Interior, where they were specifically this was back in Trump's first term, towards the end of it when they were talking about like the Willow Project, I believe it was in particular in the Alaskan wilderness and opening it up for fossil fuel exploration and extraction. They like literally took all of these letters physically into the office and were like, here is what our people, the American people broadly feel about this particular project and how many people are opposed to it. So it's ultimately like taking things offline that makes the difference. And like I sort of touched on this a little bit when I was mentioning the civil rights movement earlier, towards the sort of top of this podcast, but like it ultimately like when we're talking about change and movement building, it is like the culmination of a bunch of small individual steps that leads to this like larger change. So like with the civil rights movement, one of the biggest first campaigns that they did was like the sit-in movement, which like wasn't just one sit-in in Greensboro, North Carolina. It was so many different sit-ins collectively across a bunch of Woolworth cafes and other diners and whatnot across the South and sometimes in the North as well that like collectively together made the difference and sort of helping to reduce the amount of segregation that was so prevalent at that era.
Yeah.
And if it weren't for all those different individual sit-ins, if it had just been one, it wouldn't have really made an individual difference. Um,
Mhm.
so it's those like, I don't know, small individual actions that can really create the larger change. And so, I mean, even if you have, if social media is one of your tactics and you have a video that maybe doesn't go viral, but it gets a couple thousand views, like that's huge in and of itself. Because if you and me and like a dozen other people are each getting 10,000 views, that adds up to 100,000 or 200,000 or whatever. And so like our
Mhm.
cumulative impact is then growing. And it's the same thing with so many different strategies that can be implemented by individuals and communities across cities and counties and states.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like social media can be used, but it has to be used alongside other methods,
Yeah.
or even if it is just by itself, it can't just be a one punch. It has to be like a
Oh, for sure.
thousand punches from different angles, you know?
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
yeah, it's like social media is kind of like I don't know where I was going to that, but I totally get it.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it separates you. You know, it's kind of like it's
For
not
sure.
fully there. It's not the whole calzone, you know?
Yeah,
You gotta hit it from all the
absolutely.
angles. Throw a
No,
pizza
it
in there,
is.
Diet Coke.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is. It is. I think it's very easy for younger folks like my age and younger. I'm not like old or anything. I only just turned 30, and maybe someone thinks that that's old. I'm used to, but I
That's not
like
old,
it
man.
for folks my age and younger, like it's really easy to believe that like social media is the be all end all, but there's so
Mhm.
much that exists outside of that that's like very real and essential and like I don't know, we have the real world where things are actually changing and ultimately it's when you take that action into the physical realm that it starts to make the biggest difference. Like
Mhm.
you can have 1,000 emails in your inbox, but if you print out all of those like individual emails, suddenly it becomes very, very real. It's a reason
Yeah.
why I read physical books and don't use an e-reader, even though I have one. Like it makes a difference and gives you like a different understanding of like the effort that went into this thing or like exactly how much 1,000 pages of paper is. Like it's a lot.
You can't just turn it off like you turn
Yeah,
your computer off. It's in your
exactly.
face. You're knocking on the door, you can't turn your ears off. You're gonna keep hearing it.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's great. Okay. So when you dream of future systems that are more just and more sustainable,
Mm,
what kind of story do you find yourself telling?
yeah. Um, I've written about this recently for my newsletter, actually. Um, where like one of the in particular things that like I was thinking about a lot. So, oh, there's so many different aspects to this, but like one thing in particular that I think about in the United States or with US culture, work culture, and particularly in our approach to vacations, is how different it would look if we had a sort of like healthier work culture and gave folks a time for leisure and rest and activities outside of the office or the factory or whatever, where folks can actually get out and experience the world. Like when we approach vacations right now and like travel, whether it's to a different city or a different country, it tends to be like a trip that's a weekend long, maybe 3 days, or like a week, maybe two at most. if you're lucky. And as a result of that, we're sort of like going and dropping into these cities, running around, trying to experience as much as possible, sort of like almost like chugging it down, trying to take in as much as we can. And it just like, it doesn't give us space to like really appreciate it. And we have like our sort of travel industry is built around that. And part of that like pursuit of convenience and expediency is inherent to like the way aircrafts work and like our approach to like airplanes and airports. Like it is the fastest way to get someplace for sure right now, especially in the US where we don't have high-speed rail. But it is also the most emitting as a result of that. And maybe if we built out more like railways in the United States or like we went back to like ocean liners and found a like way to do ocean travel with like sailboats and whatnot in a way that was like a little bit more convenient and less emitting, you could do that, but like that kind of travel just takes a long time. Like
Yeah.
for me to even taking a train, even if we had a high-speed rail, taking a train across the United States would still take probably like a day because
Yeah.
the country's just massive versus like a 6 hour flight or whatever from the East Coast to West Coast. And then if you're talking about like going on a boat to get across the Atlantic or across the Pacific or whatever, that's going to take a
Months.
couple days or
Yeah.
it's going to take a while,
Yeah.
depending on like the speed will depend on how the boat is made. But anyway, and so like if you're trying to do that, even if we think about whatever, a day to get across the country on train, and then we'll say 3 to 5 days to get across the ocean on a boat, suddenly that's your week of your vacation gone.
Mhm.
Um, but if we had a world in which like you could take a month off work or whatever, like that's the first week of your trip. And frankly, like I've gone to Japan, I've been on their bullet train. It's cool, like it's fun.
Yeah.
Like the way that they design their trains is gorgeous, and like France is investing a lot in high-speed rail, and they put out designs for what their new rail cars will look like. And they're gorgeous. They're luxurious, frankly. And it makes that experience a lot more pleasurable as opposed to like being crammed three deep in your airplane seat where you don't have any room for your shoulders, your elbows, or whatever. And that's like deeply uncomfortable. I frankly like I travel often enough that I hate planes. I hate flying. Like it's
Mhm.
just so deeply uncomfortable. I like getting to where I'm going, like that's great, but if I could never be on a plane again, that would be a dream. And so like there could be a way in which like we transform travel to be something that's slow and luxurious, and you're not like rushing through your travel, and you have the time to really like embrace the culture of the city that you're visiting and really see what it's like and interact with people there, and it becomes much less transactional. Um, but that's so contradictory to the way that our travel industry is set up right now. So that's just like one specific example of like how travel could change if we move
Mhm.
towards the like slower way of living, that embraced space for leisure and wasn't so like productivity centric. But there's also things like the products that we buy could be like totally different. Where like I don't know, your glassware, your cupboard, like your sort of cutlery and your plates and whatnot, instead of getting something from Target for like $1 a plate or whatever, where it's like these plastic molds that are getting shipped from China, um, we could have a world in which where we move back to sort of like local artisanal craftsmanship, and so like things are like hand done pottery and whatnot. And yes, those
Mhm.
things are like inherently more expensive because they're not mass produced. But if we didn't have such exorbitant wealth inequality, um, it could be possible and feasible for folks to have those kinds of things. And like, you don't need, not every person needs whatever, a dozen plates if they're going to have a dinner party once every 3 months. Like, you can have like libraries for that kind of like fine dining equipment. For instance, like here in Seattle in Capitol Hill, there is the Capitol Hill Tool Library, which yes has um like hacksaws and that kind of stuff where you can get like actual physical tools that you can rent because like not everyone needs a drill 24/7. We all like if you live alone or have your own space, like you're probably gonna have a drill because you need it occasionally. Uh,
Mhm.
But if you have tool libraries or other kinds of libraries where people are pooling their resources, when you don't need something, you can put it in the library, someone else can use it. And then when you do need it, it's there for you to like have access to. And so like that's one kind of transformation that's already underway and I would love to see like become more prevalent. Um, where there's a little bit more of like a sharing economy, as some folks talk about it, uh,
Mm,
where we recognize that kind of, I don't know, prioritizing, I guess, or deprioritizing convenience and individual ownership and prioritizing community and collective ownership and a slowing down, frankly, of our way of living. And like there's this book by Kohei Saito, who is like this Japanese philosopher who talks a lot about that. There's another
mhm,
book that came out recently by oh my God, what is his name? He's a French economist. Uh,
mhm,
Timothy Parikh is his name. He wrote a book called Slow Down or Die, which is also about this idea of like the necessity, frankly, of creating an economy that like moves slower, and gives us time and space to like be with ourselves, to be in community, to experience nature, as opposed to like our sort of fast-paced culture that like is fast-paced because of its desire for growth and for profit that
mhm.
doesn't give us time to be with ourselves and to actually experience life.
Yeah. I like the way your brain works, man. Especially with that tool library. I got all these drills sitting around. I don't even use them. You know, it's like
Right?
every 6 months my cabinet breaks and then I bust it out. But other than
Yeah,
that, it's just collecting dust. Every time I pull it, I got dusted off. It's like, dang, I need a tool library card, man.
exactly. Exactly.
That's good. Okay. So if a student listening to this podcast wanted to share their vision of a better climate future, like you have, through a short video or poem or even a tweet that, what advice would you give them to start?
Ah, yeah. Um, I don't know how this is going to come across, but the main advice that I would give is lower your expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know. As someone who like reads a lot, for instance, I've read so many like tremendous books and incredible essays and these like beautiful works of literature and art that like I would love to create my own sort of version of my own like magnum opus or whatever, my
Mm-hmm.
masterpiece. Um, but the reality is most of the stuff that I produce, most of the stuff that any individual will produce, isn't
Mm-hmm.
going to be that. Like, it's not going to be perfect or great or whatever. And it's just about producing something that you can be okay with. Like, you don't even have to be happy with it. You just have to be able to live with it being
Yeah.
out in the world. And I think that's like the most important place to start. It's just creating something that you can live with, throwing it out into the world and moving on to the next thing. Because the more stuff that you produce, the more often that you write, the more often you make videos or poetry or paint or draw or whatever, the more often that you're doing those things and engaging in that practice, the better you'll get in the long run. And not everything will be perfect and beautiful, but eventually, through enough practice and progress, you'll eventually reach that kind of like masterpiece that you're striving to create. Um, and it's just like it's just that repetition, and in particular for folks who are thinking about like social media and content creation, like this is advice I need to give myself and take myself is like it's this consistency that matters. Like the individual quality of each video or post or whatever matters significantly less than just like constantly creating content and sort of putting it out there for your audience to interact with, and
Mm-hmm.
digest and consume in some way, shape, or form. Um, and so that kind of like consistent practice is both great for just like building an audience and it is doubly so great for improving your own skill set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
just
Just
create
consistency.
consistency,
Mm-hmm.
practice is like the most important place to start. Like, and I mean, also like it with lowering your expectations, it also helps with just like the act of creation in general. Like most of my approach to writing it's every person has their own approach to writing, I'll just say, but like I don't write from an outline. I
Mm.
try to outline stuff occasionally, and then like halfway through the piece, I'm like, this outline doesn't make sense anymore. I'm going in a different direction, and that's fine. Um, my approach to writing tends to be like free writing or stream of consciousness, or like free associations, which what other people call it, excuse me, where it's literally like writing one sentence and then just seeing what that sentence sparks next and like what comes naturally to your mind after that and just following that train of thought and writing that way and not caring about the quality or if it makes sense or if the grammar is right or whatever, but just like putting your thoughts down and just ignoring quality, ignoring how good it is or how good you want it to be, and just writing so that eventually you have something that is concrete and finished that you can then improve upon, um, and polish off, if you will.
That's great.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing.
for sure.
Okay, I got one last thought. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. And I kind of already have a guess of your answer to this, but do you think the stories students tell today could shape the policies of tomorrow?
Absolutely. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, one of the things that I talked about, I mentioned this book, Emergent Strategy, earlier in the conversation. But like one of the other elements that Adrienne Maree Brown talks about, and that I've talked about to a lot of other people, is this idea of storytelling and visioning.
Mhm.
It is like sort of like, I don't know, almost a foundational first step to movement building and thinking about change in the world is like creating a clear vision of what you want the world to be. And so like telling stories and thinking about what that could look like in the world down the road, whether it's next year or 5 years or 10 years later, can really help you to think critically and clearly about like what steps you're going to take. So yeah, absolutely. The stories that folks tell shapes the way you think about the world, shapes the way other people think about the world, and can really help to transform the policies that are implemented and the kind of country and world that we live in down the road.
Well, that's amazing, man. That's truly wonderful. I totally agree. Stories are important, and keeping the visions out there and influencing the masses is great. Well, it looks like we're out of time, so thank you so much, Cyrus.
For sure.
And for our listeners out there, remember to use code 20thread for 20% off your first order with SA Pro. And on that note, we're all done. Thank you, man.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you.